And then we've been in a series now for the last handful of weeks. We're going to wrap it up today. It's called The Weary World Rejoices. And what we've been looking at is kind of the reality that, especially on holidays, we feel some tension, maybe even some anxiety, sometimes around being maybe even with family, right? Or sometimes it's things are brought up around the holidays. We feel some losses maybe. We feel that another year has passed. And some of the realities of life just kind of spike a bit. And we said that's true all the time, but we just probably feel a little more around the holidays. And we've been talking about how do we do this? How do we grab hold of peace and joy? And I said this over the last few weeks. My big passion in this series is to try to get our faith to show up kind of on ground level, right? I wanted out of the theory, out of our faith is an event or a moment, and show that it's really an everyday moment by moment experience, not just a one-time thing that we experience at the mountaintop. It's something that I can grab hold of in a real, practical, and helpful way all the time. No matter where I find myself, I can interact with Jesus and find real help, real support. He can be my savior in the everyday moments of life, right? Not just kind of the deepest valleys. And so we've been talking about that over the last handful of weeks. If you missed those conversations, or maybe you're just jumping in with us, you can go catch up online if you want to on our YouTube channel or website and follow along, of course, there. What I want to do today, though, is kind of wrap the conversation up. Last week we talked about peace a lot. I want to extend that conversation and talk about how to grab hold of peace. And today especially, if you're a note taker, this is going to be a great day to take some notes. If you're not and you just want to take a picture of the whiteboard, that's great too, right? We're going to kind of break some things down on here. But this is going to be one of those conversations that we're going to talk about a lot of stuff that's really, really going to be helpful. And this passage in particular, this one we've been working on memorizing, especially these last few verses, has been very, very relevant to me, something I've come back to over and over again. So there might be some great notes to grab hold of and get practical with, right? So here's where we're going to be today in Philippians chapter 4. We can look here on the screen, or you can open your Bibles to it. Here's what Paul says to us. Remember, from jail. He's writing from jail while he says this. I'm sure that he has to practice this himself. He says this, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. And he says, whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, he says, put into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. Right? Again, this promise that if I do these things, if I direct my mind towards these certain perspectives, if I choose to see things a certain way or choose to see certain things, there's a promise connected here that God will be with me, right? The God of peace. And last week we talked about the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, right? Will guard your heart and your mind in Christ Jesus. And he flips it this week and says, right, the peace of God comes with that. Now the God of peace is going to be with you. Right, the peace of God and the God of peace, all this is promised, right? When I pray to him, when I reach out to him, when I move towards God, and then if I direct my thoughts in a specific way, and we're going to talk about that today. And I remember over the last handful of weeks, we're going to redraw some of this picture that we've been kind of looking at together. We said there's a reality that the first step to finding joy and peace is I want to recognize there's some things that are in the realm of my control, and then there's some things that are outside of the realm of my control. And today what I want to do is I want to look at that specifically through the lens of what's going on in here, right? What's going on in my mind, what I'm choosing to focus my thoughts around. And again, this is something that's really kind of hard for us to recognize. We don't often think about what we're thinking about. But we want to do that today and get specific about it. And what we're going to see is that I'm going to put ourselves outside of the circle today. And what we're going to do is we're going to see there are a few different ways to see life. And what Paul's going to do is he's going to help us to illustrate, to see that there's an entire way to see our circumstances, to see our relationships, to see ourselves. And some of what we're going to illustrate today is this. We're going to see that there is some ugly to see in life, and that's pretty easy for us to see. There's also a whole lot of good. And before we break these words down that we just read, lovely and right and noble and admirable, all these things, what I want to make sure to do is I want to address this even before we begin to break these down, because some of us are like, or do we just read a list of positive thinking tools? Is that all this is? It's just we're trying to think about the good stuff and ignore the bad stuff and pretend like it's not there. Is that what God's telling us to do? Just imagine that huge problem over there isn't there. Just think about the rosy things, right? The rainbows and butterflies stuff, and that will be great. You'll feel peaceful. That's actually not what God's saying. That's not what Paul's asking us to do. Remember, Paul's in prison, right? He's not like, hey, pretend like I'm not in prison. I'm just happy out here. Here's what he's saying. He's saying that there's always going to be the reality of the imperfect, the unfinished, the ugly. That's always going to be there. It's not a denial of that reality. What he's saying is, it's also not the whole story. And here's what I want us to avoid before we jump into it. We have a tendency to have black and white thinking about things. This person did a bad thing, so they are bad. Right? This thing happened and it was good, so it's good. The reality is there's a mixed bag to people. There's a mixed bag to circumstances. There's a mixed bag to me, right? And so I have the freedom to choose where I put my focus. And this is what Paul's going to argue, is he's going to say, hey, I want you to direct your focus in a specific way. And if you do, we'll break this down. If I put my focus over here, where we're going to put all these words that Paul broke down for us, the God of peace is going to be with me as I direct my attention. Okay, so I want us to grab hold of that perspective before we dive into the words. And lastly, I want us to have this point as we dive into it. So important. Where we choose to focus is what we choose to grow. Okay, I want you to have this just burned into your memory. Where we choose to focus out of that mixed bag is what will grow in our attention and our focus and in all of our experiences of life. If you've ever been close to somebody, had a close relationship, you've experienced this before. If you've been close to a human being and you've seen the ugly parts of who they are, the imperfect, the unfinished parts, you can choose to focus on that, and that will become more and more of a reality until that's kind of all that you see about them. I remember in the early years of our marriage, I started to realize that I had a bunch of habits I didn't know I had. I left socks everywhere. I left my books everywhere. I didn't put stuff away. And I started to realize that was true, because now I have another human being that's like, hey, man, you're a big slob, right? Like, what's your deal, right? And we had to work through that. And to Lori's credit, she chose to not focus on the realities of all my imperfections. Not that we never talked about it or she never brought it up, but she's like, hey, there's this stuff that you do that kind of drives me crazy. And there's all this other great stuff about who you are, and I'm going to choose to focus on that. I'm going to focus on the reality of who you are, the man I married. And over time, as I celebrate you, I bet he's going to figure out that needs to put some stuff away, right? You and I all experience this all the time. Where we choose to focus is what we choose to grow. This is massive. You want to see your life change in a real and practical way, get a hold of this point, okay? Now, we're going to see it show up in a real way as we break the words down. Let's begin to dive into it here on the whiteboard. So he says, the first thing he says is this. He says, whatever is true, put your mind on what is true. Now, another translation would say whatever's honest. And in this context, really, the opposite of true isn't so much false, although it's connected to that. It's more the idea of fake. It's more the idea of being fake. And here's what I mean. He's going to say, whatever is in alignment with reality, if I present myself in accordance with truth, I'm being genuine and real. Put your mind on the things that has to do with being genuine and real. How do I represent reality and honesty, not try to present a fake version of myself that everybody else thinks something that's not really real about me. Put your mind on what is true, he's going to say, not on what is fake, not on the illusion, not on deceit or lies. He's going to go to the next word here. He says, whatever is noble. Whatever is noble. A bunch of different aspects to this word. The opposite of this may be something like this. It would be mocking, right? The idea of noble is sacred. Put your mind on the things that have value, that are sacred. Here's one of the challenges of our culture is what we have a hard time doing is allowing anything to be off limits from mockery. Everything is fair game. In some ways, we have to just kind of admit this, that in some ways our humor has become a humor of mockery. We have turned into a culture of mockers. What does that mean? It means everything's fair game. The birth of Jesus is fair game. Death is fair game. Life is fair game, right? Deep, relational, intimate. It's all fair game. And what Paul's going to say is don't allow your mind to go towards the 7th grade version, right, of seeing the sacred things of life. Choose to hold those in high regard. The great gifts that God has given us, those are noble, they're holy, they're sacred, and allow them to be that, right? So when we look around, we want to take some of those things serious. We don't want to take ourselves too seriously. That's not the idea. But we want to look around and we want to have the humility. It takes some humility to not be a mocker, to put ourselves out there and say, man, that's a big deal. That thing's sacred. There's a vulnerability to going in on recognizing that's something that's a big deal and it should be valued and it's not open to mockery in my mind, in my heart, or in my language, right? My relationships. Here's another one. He says, whatever is right, and this is the idea of justice or of doing right. This is fascinating. The opposite of this would be doing wrong or doing injustice. If you ever watched a movie where there's a criminal mastermind, I'm always fascinated by this, how brilliant sometimes people are in coming up with evil. I'm like, man, if you just took like 10% of that creativity and intentionality and did something good with it, something right with it, you would be amazing, right? You'd be an incredible success instead of trying to put all of your thoughts and mind and heart on doing wrong. What if we focused on doing right? What if instead of trying to cut a corner or get away with something or hope that somebody failed, what if instead of trying to sneak behind somebody's back and try to right? What if we said, how do I focus on doing the righteous, the right thing in that situation in order to benefit other people? What if my mind was directed towards doing the right thing? This is what Paul is driving at. He's going to talk about whatever is pure, focus on that. The opposite of that would be polluted. Rather than allow my mind to be filled with the harmful and ugly and tainted things of life. We're going to see this stuff, right? It's inevitable. But I can choose how much I'm going to spend time getting my heart and mind and thoughts into the gutter. This, when you hear, right, that phrase, get your mind out of the gutter, this is the idea. I could instead focus on, God, what gifts have you given that are pure, that are wonderful, that are untainted? God, thank you for the gifts of friendship in the holidays. Thank you for the gifts of family. Thank you for a season to pause, reflect, celebrate the birth of Jesus. Thank you for Jesus, right? You can see these things begin to link together. Where if I focus my mind on what is pure, on the good gifts that God the Father has given me, I'm going to end up thinking down these roads as well, pulling out of the polluted. And while the church at large probably went overboard on focusing on every movie that has a certain rating's the devil, there is a reality that if I'm constantly putting in front of my face garbage, crime, murder, sexuality that's inappropriate, coarse language, if I'm always kind of entertaining myself with that, if I'm always hearing music that is feeding ugly in my heart and mind, there's a reality that has an impact on me, right? You ever get music just can't get out of your head? My girls right now, they're in a musical, Joseph, the Technicolor, amazing Dreamcoat thing, right? Weather Vane, and so all they do is, I have 3 daughters, right? And they're all in musicals all the time, and so I just get subjected to loud singing at all hours of the day, and I get these song lyrics stuck in my head forever. I have no musical ability whatsoever, right? But I constantly have this musical in my head. I don't even want it there. I don't even want to think about that song anymore, right? They have 22 of these performances. They're going all the time. I can't get it out of my head. Why? Because I'm constantly exposed to it. If I'm always in the polluted, if my friends are always talking about this, there's just a reality, right? We don't need to be legalistic or crazy about it, but there's a reality. This is impacting me. And what if I intentionally looked more often, focused more often on the pure, on the good gifts that God has given, and on the things that I can be grateful for? He talks about what is lovely. This was interesting to look into. When Paul uses this word lovely, the opposite of it, it's not so much just like beauty, although there may be a piece of that. It's more the idea that I'm going to focus on being a blessing to other people. That I'm going to put my mind on how to give to other people, how to love other people, how to build other people up. The opposite of this would be kind of a mindset that is selfish, that is always focused on extracting from people. How can I get something from you? How can I take from you? Focusing on lovely, saying, I'm going to choose to take the creative powers of my mind, and rather than trying to get from, I'm going to ask, how can I give to? How can I build up? How can I encourage? Who can I send a text to who may be thin on encouragement right now? Right? Totally different animal. Totally different animal. When I land over here in the lovely more and more, this right again, the God of peace is with me. There's a joy that comes with this kind of living, right? There's an excitement to it. Who can I be putting gas into their tank and helping them to continue to thrive or pull them up if they're feeling low? When I'm here, you guys all know how this feels. There's an anxiousness. There's an anxiousness. How do I get more? And the thing about more is there's never enough. If I get a little bit from somebody, I'm going to just want a little bit more. And it's greedy and it's selfish, and it's why isn't somebody doing something for me, or how can they help and serve me? Me. Paul's going to say, hey, no. How about we direct our thoughts towards the lovely? How do I be lovely in my approach to other people, building them up, helping them to thrive? Okay, a few more. This one is extremely powerful. He says, whatever is admirable. This was an interesting one. Whatever is admirable. The idea of this is when I look at other people, this one's a hard one to do. It's hard for me to do. When I look at other people, what I want to look for is I want to look for what I can celebrate in that human being. What is admirable in them? What can I look for where there's a win? I find this sometimes in Christian cultures that whenever somebody's got a win, we kind of feel like it's our responsibility to humble them and make sure everybody knows that they're not that great. Jesus is great. Right? And that's true. Jesus is the only one that's really, really great. And if you're in a marriage and you're in a friendship, if you have a mom or a dad, if you have a son or a daughter, if you're going to choose where you focus on, it's a conscious decision to land here instead of landing over here, which is in the critical zone. In the critical zone. So some of you are like me, and you always see the gaps. You always see the room for improvement. I see it in myself. I probably see it in other people. Right? I see it in situations. I see where the opportunity is for growth, or for movement forward. Some of that's great. God uses that. Sometimes that comes out especially when I'm fatigued. That's going to show up like this. And here's what you're not, and here's what you could do, or here's what you messed up. And what Paul's going to say is, you want peace? It's not denial of reality that this isn't here. It's not saying that there's not stuff that could move or change or grow. The irony is, if you really want to see this stuff change or move or grow, you should do this. You should celebrate. You should fan into flame what somebody already is. What they're really doing. They're doing good, right? Guys, I'm telling this to myself right now because I have to remember this over and over and over again, right? If you want to see more and more of this, because whatever I focus on is what I'm going to see grow, I got to look for the admirable. What in you can we see grow? So sometimes, even in a situation, if I want to see more of something, I want to look for it and say, well, what is God doing? Guys, I'll tell you, I'll be the first to tell you, I see 1,000 things I want to improve here at the church, right? If all I do is stare at those, and we don't stop and look for the admirable, look for what God is doing, fan that into flame, right? Then just, I'm going to get upset and grumpy about things that I don't have where I want them yet. Guys, that's true at home. That's true in relationships. That's true at work. That's true at school. You name it, right? I want to look for what can I celebrate? What can I clap for? What can I fan into flame? and he's going to say, this is where the peace is. That's where the movement is. Okay. Last few. He says, whatever is, we'll do these together. Whatever is excellent or praiseworthy. Whatever is excellent or praiseworthy. This is when I look at a situation, what can I look for and see the highest, the best, the thing that we thank God for, as opposed to looking for things and looking for the mediocre, looking for the average, just kind of settling. And the other one is looking at, instead of something that's praiseworthy, looking for something that is shameful. Looking for something that's shameful. What can I thank God for in my relationship, in my marriage? What can I look and thank God for with my mom and dad, with my kids? Guys, even with ourselves, I grew up with an instinct that if I just beat myself enough, I could change and perform. And there's a side in a short-term way that you can do some of that. But the long term is that doesn't really work. The reality is, if I want to see change in my life, I should look for what God, hear me, is already doing, for what he's already done. God has already made, if you're a follower of Jesus today, God has already chosen to adopt you into the family. He already did that. You don't have to work for it. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to wait until you figure this out. He's already done that. When I begin to understand that God has moved, that he has worked, that he is working, that this is true about me now. I can begin to steer my heart and my mind and my thoughts into this lane, and I'm going to see change happen in me. I'm going to experience more peace in relationships. Again, doesn't mean there's never a hard conversation to have if I'm living over here. Doesn't mean that I'm ignoring reality. It means that the bulk of my thoughts and my mind, the bulk of my energy and my attention, if I have to have it land somewhere, it's going to land here. And Paul says when it lands here, the God of peace is with you. He's with you. And we experience that. When we live to give, when we focus on building others up, when we grab hold of what is true, when we look at how do I do right instead of wrong, how can I look for that which is able to be celebrated rather than criticized or nitpicked, we end up moving towards a place that is powerful. And guys, we need to know this, right? We know that one of the big things I run into as a pastor, and I had to work through a lot of it in myself as well, is that it's easy to land here in regards to ourselves. We think I blew it. I made that decision. It was the wrong decision. And now we'll start to talk to ourselves in ways that we would never talk to other people. I'm an idiot. I'm a loser. What was I thinking? I'm never going to amount to anything. We'll start saying things to ourselves that send us into a deep and downward spiral. And we'll go down deep into shame. And it will unravel us. And listen, this is the key piece, okay? When I do that, when I go down into shame and start saying things that are not true, what happens is these behaviors start to make sense. Somebody who's an idiot like me, a loser like me, well, they're losers. That's what doing wrong makes sense because that's what people like me do. Right? People like me look at stuff that's polluted and think about it all the time because then again, I'm a loser. I'm a screw up. We start to make this make sense for us. I should live like this because this is who I am. Guys, you see, this is huge. What's happening in my heart and mind, in my thoughts, what I say to myself can unravel me to the point where I begin to believe that all of this is home and this starts to feel foreign. And God the Father would look at us and say, you don't belong here. You need to hear me say that. You don't belong here. This isn't what you're made for. You're made to be a child of God. You are made for lovely and pure and others focused. You're made to be a blessing. You're not made to tear down and harm and destroy. That's not why you're put here. You're made to be a child of God. Because we're children of God. This is what children of God do. That's what they think about. It's what their minds are filled with. And it's where the God of peace is. See how this starts to show up all the time. When I'm at a high school basketball game, when I'm driving, when I'm at work, when I'm in a conversation, all the time, I'm making little micro decisions that sound like this or sound like this. I'd love to say to you that there's something that clicks and we just live here all the time and we never do that. That's just not how it works. Right? That's why there's no arrival point. Knowing this information doesn't solve this. It's constantly walking with Jesus and asking, how do I think, Lord, more in alignment with who you are, with where you are, with what is all on this side of the table. Here's an example of one that you could grab hold of. If you've walked in shame, beat yourself up, listen to this promise in 1 Peter. Just listen to it. Take it in. It says, "And the God of all grace, who called you," hear that personally, "who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, after you've suffered a little while, will himself restore and make you strong, firm, and steadfast." God is doing this in you. God is focusing on what is lovely in you. He's taken care of this in Christ for you. He's paid for it. That's what Jesus was doing on the cross. And now he's fanning into flame, helping you and I live as a child of God if we said yes to him. Paul elsewhere is going to say that this is really what spiritual warfare is. He uses military language in 2 Corinthians. He says, "We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God." And then here's the idea. We take captive every thought and make it obedient to Christ. He's saying this is an active, militant process that's happening in my brain. It's a battle where I have to take these thoughts and I grapple them and I wrestle them over to Jesus. This is not passive. It's not just going to happen in some spiritual ooze that just makes me more like Jesus. I have to recognize, wait a minute, I'm focused on what I can get right now. Wait a minute. Who is Jesus? He is a giver by name. How do I be lovely? How do I focus on what is lovely in the situation? I'm focusing on the gaps and I'm pointing. I always know I'm tired when I start to sound like this. How do I get back to what's admirable? How do I fan that into flame? It's a battle. It's a grapple. It's a wrestle where I can't check out all the way. I have to stay engaged. And when I do, though, the promise is beautiful that the God who is himself our peace, he's with us. He's with us. Here's the reality. One of the greatest gifts that God has given us is the ability and the freedom to direct our own minds. We have, like God, we're made in his image. We get the ability to choose. I want you to feel the right and the privilege that we have to choose to not be trapped over here. I'm not a victim that's stuck over here. I can choose to embrace this arrow. I can choose to see the other side of the equation. And I can grab hold of that, taking my thoughts captive in an active way. I'll never be perfect at it this side of heaven. But I get to walk out of the slavery of victim thinking and blameful thinking and shameful thinking and walk into a way that builds up, a way that brings life, a way that Jesus would think if he were living in my skin. Say, Ryan, what do we do with this? How do we walk away today? Here's just a few simple steps, right, to begin to do this. And we can do these over and over and over again. First, I want to do this. I want to ask, what am I focusing on right now? What is eating my lunch right now? What is it, a relationship? Is it a problem? Is it? And here's the question. Do I want that to grow? Do I want that problem to expand in my experience of life? Where I know every little bit about it. And I see every little thing that's wrong with that person. And I can break down for you all the things that I can nitpick about. Is that what I'm focusing on? Or am I looking to find what's lovely and true in all these things? Is my focus where I want it to be? Right, here's the next piece. I want to zero on the perspective that leads to peace. We can say every situation is going to have some of this whole picture. And it's a conscious decision to say, okay, I can land here more and more often. I want to zero in on this. Now that I know what it is, now that I can see it, now that it's been illustrated for, I can find that perspective. I can find something that's praiseworthy or excellent. I can land there more and more. And then make it really practical. Write it down. Say it out loud. Repeat it. Guys, we've got to start to get practical with this. When I find something admirable, I say it. I've been trying to challenge myself to do this more and more. I want to celebrate and say it out loud. I have to focus. I have to fight to remember it. How do I get it out there and repeat it, recognize it? Maybe it's a gratitude journal. Maybe it's writing down these verses and putting them on the fridge. Maybe it's beginning to capture more and more and more of this perspective that leads to peace in ways that are helpful to you, where it becomes the center point of our conversations more and more, and we find more and more the experience of peace as we meet God in the middle of it. As the band comes out, guys, would you bow your heads and close your eyes with me? And we'll sing and worship and practice this together. God, we, in many ways, we feel weary. And it's a weary experience, God, to live in the midst and to be consumed by our fears and our frustrations and our problems. Those things are always going to be there. And Lord, you know, you're a witness of my life. You know that I need help, that we need help with this. We need reminders, and that your Spirit brings those things on the left side, on the right side of the board there, God, to our minds all over and over and over again. You're drawing us into the path that leads to life. Would you help us today to zero in on that? To see the wonderful things that are worthy of praising you. You've been kind to us, God, in ways that are uncountable, immeasurable. And the gifts that you've given overwhelm. Would you help us to see it? Meet us here, even now.